Oh, it says
Okay,
live.
there
right
we
there.
are. There we go. Problem solved. Okay. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Latinx Heritage Month episode of Spill the Tea with Emery Lee and author Roundtable. I am Emery Lee, author of Meet Cute Diary, out from HarperCollins, May 4th, 2021. Today, we're basically just going to be talking about all things Latinx and being an author and dealing with all things Latinx in publishing, and with a de-emphasis on oppression and an emphasis on what we love about being authors and our experiences. So I'm here with 5 other authors. If you all would like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Jonny Garzavilla. My pronouns are he, she, they, whichever you want to use. I am a writer of contemporary young adult novels, including my debut, 1500 Miles from the Sun, which comes out next June, and is about Jules, a Corpus Christi teenager who accidentally comes out over Twitter when he gets way too drunk at a party, and the Los Angeles boy who slides into Jules' DMs the next morning.
Hi, I'm Adrianna. I am the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez that came out last July. It's a middle grade contemporary fantasy that takes place in Central Texas and features a Cuban-American boy that can talk to animals. And it has a Tule Vieja, which is a witch that can turn into animals. And then I will have another book coming out next fall called Cuba in My Pocket, and it's a historical fiction.
Hi, my name is Peter Lopez. I am the owner of My LZ Design, which is a book marketing design studio, and the host of Author Chat Room.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amparo Ortiz. I'm the author of Blaze Wrath Games. I don't know if you can see it well. There it is, yeah. That is a young adult contemporary fantasy that's basically the World Cup with dragons, featuring a Puerto Rican main character who wants to represent her country and also try to solve a magical conspiracy within this tournament. And I also have a middle grade graphic novel coming out from HarperCollins in 2022, so a little bit of a time away from now. But yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vincent Turado. I am a horror writer, both of young adult and adult fiction. I have no news yet about books, so you will find out on Twitter in the coming weeks. But yes, you can just follow me and you'll get those news very, very soon. Also, I'm sorry, Jonny, I made all those faces because I was like, oh, okay. Like, I didn't know this is what your book was about. So I was like reacting with my face like, oh, okay. He just like outed himself on Twitter. Okay.
I'm reading from a note thing. I did not see the faces. So
that's fair. No, everyone else did. That's the important thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone will play back those faces and kind of...
That's true. I'll catch it next time. I'll catch it on the replay.
Okay, great. So now that we have all been introduced, let us jump into the questions. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is culture. And basically I want to discuss how your culture plays into the things that you write, as well as things that you would want anyone writing about your culture or writing a character from your culture to keep in mind.
I'll start, I guess. I think that like culture in general is kind of like part ancestry, part upbringing, and part location. Like as a Chicanx person, I'm also Tejanex, and so like both of those identities are going to play a part in the storyline and who my characters are. Like you'll see word choices that are kind of specific to the region, whether it's like mimis or mames or hue. The food is going to be Mexican, but it's also going to be kind of like Tex-Mexy too. Like you're going to see nachos and like specifically like yellow queso and like flour tortillas everywhere. So like culture, like I think is very specific to like just growing up in Texas as a Chicanx person. And I think like speaking to people who write like that culture, I think it's more important to speak to like people who share that culture, like other Chicanx people, because I think while I was writing, a big thing that I had to remind myself of is like imposter syndrome is shit and doesn't mean anything. And like I would find myself trying to talk myself out of writing a story that has like a bilingual character or a character that knows Spanish at all, because I'm not really bilingual. Or like even growing up in a culture that I didn't really have a lot of, growing up in a very small white town. And so like to fellow Chicanx people writing Chicanx stories, I just want to say that like I promise the love and voice that you put into your story and that it's coming from your heart and soul is going to be good enough to write that book.
Mm-hmm. Jonny, I like that you listed a ton of food, because for me, that is the key I've found, like in my manuscripts, to tie them to my culture. I think I realized that coming from a family that is a refugee family that had to leave everything behind, the things that you have that remain from your family history are the recipes that your family remembers. It's the language and it's the stories. And so I've found that I tend to use food a ton in my stories. And I thought that was just a normal thing, because food is a huge deal in my family. Because like I said, it's how we stay connected to our heritage. And I would talk to other authors and they're like, oh, I forgot to have my characters eat for like 20 chapters. I'm like, well, my characters have been doing nothing but eating for 20 chapters. Like, I don't understand. And so for me, yeah, food is huge in my books, even though they're not necessarily like food books, but that's how I show, you know, who I am and who my family is and my culture. But I think I was like you too, where I felt like I needed permission almost to write my culture. When the first draft of Nestor Lopez, Nestor was Benjamin, because he was white. I didn't know that I could actually write a Cuban American character. I thought, looking at the bookshelves, I thought, no, he has to be white. That's the only thing that's going to sell. That's the only thing that people want to read. And I kind of needed to give myself permission to go ahead and dive in and include my culture, because we're always told as writers to write what you know. And well, shit, this is what I know. Like, this is what I'm going to put. They always make it sound like the diversity in our books is a deliberate choice. And to me, I've always struggled with that, because it's not. I'm writing my story, and this is just who I am. And it happens to be a Cuban American person that talks about food a lot. So there you go.
Yeah, I actually love how you said that, because I feel like it's true that it really is seen by publishing as this thing that we're deliberately adding into the book to try to like make this book special or different. Like, oh, why this book is so unique because it's our culture. And it's like, no, like I think some of the biggest things that kind of like just slip into a book as you're writing them are things that you know by default, things that you consider normal, and that's what your culture is going to largely impact. So I think that's a really, underexplored way of looking at it, and something that I feel like people don't really talk about a lot. But I do feel like that's definitely something to keep in mind.
For me, I guess one cultural thing I always like tend to write, either in my like short stories or my upcoming novels that will one day get a book deal, is like the aspect of hair for me, because I'm like, I don't know if you notice, I have an afro, so like I'm black, I'm like visibly black, but like I'm also Latina. And in my novels, I always tend to write my characters, pretty much the same as me. Like they have kinky 4C hair, and they're like, oh, today's wash day, and that means I'm gonna be washing my hair for 5 hours. And like a lot of the situations I find in my book is just like, okay, is she wearing box braids today? Because if she is, then in chapter 20, I'm going to need to like write a whole explanation of like, the takedown of box braids. And the thing about that is that it becomes kind of odd, because a lot of people don't know that you can be black and Latina. Like they assume it's like, oh, you're half black and half. I was like, no. Everyone in my family is from Dominican Republic. And so we are Latina and black. Like it becomes like this whole thing. And having to showcase that in my writing has been like kind of difficult, because even me in high school, I didn't know that was possible. Like I just did not. And I had to really find a way to balance it so that it doesn't become like, oh, the whole plot of the story, because I'm a horror writer. So like creepy things are going to happen. But I also want you to keep in mind, this isn't a white person.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I agree with everyone in the sense that I do include everything that you've mentioned, but I also, I think I center specifically with Blaze Wrath games because my first ever novel, the main character was a white boy. I had no business writing about that person because I was just completely, like, how do you say it? Like, I was just not really living that experience. So I had to force myself to think from a place of privilege, and it just didn't work out for me. But in terms of identity within Blaze Wrath games, I like to talk about policing that identity and saying who is supposed to be or who is supposedly Latinx versus someone who isn't considered that way. And I specifically chose, sorry, there's a fly around here. I specifically chose a character who is born in Puerto Rico but raised in the States. So she personally feels like she's Puerto Rican, but others don't. And that's something that I encounter a lot. Someone who has not left the country to live elsewhere. I see that a lot. And I also feel like language is important because she's not bilingual. And she still feels like she is part of this country. She is darker than most people, but is she really Puerto Rican just because of her skin color? Like, so many questions that she has are questions that I've encountered as an academic and as a woman in general. It's something that I really want to include in everything I write, especially if I'm writing about Puerto Rican characters tackling other things within the fantasy genre. Because I feel like even though it's fantastical elements, there's has to be something that grounds the story in our reality.
Yeah, and I think something I think about too a lot in regards to that too is like I feel like people sometimes forget that like even if a story is fantasy, that the readers are in our world, you know, and like they can pick up a book and like, you know, for instance, like if you're writing like a Puerto Rican character, like Puerto Rican readers will recognize and resonate with a character, even if that character doesn't literally say, I am from Puerto Rico. You know what I mean? And there's like this element of culture and like who we are that I feel is sometimes forgotten when it comes to things like fantasy. Just because people will think, oh, well, it's a secondary world, so these things don't matter anymore. And it's not that they don't matter anymore, because as long as your readers are people from this world, you know, they're going to resonate with certain types of stories and certain culture, you know. And I think as long as white people kind of have this idea that like whiteness is the default and that all whiteness is accessible to everybody and that is, you know, and the universal culture, I think there's kind of this idea that like culture gets erased when you go into a fantasy world. And I think that's, you know, not true.
Yeah, I mean, how can you have dragons and wizards and witches and magic users in general and other creatures, but like you can't talk about cultural identity, especially through power? Like, how do we define what someone is? Do we define that for them, or do they have the power to actually define it for themselves? How do we actually tell other people who they are? Like, why would we do that? And I feel like fantasy does that a lot in terms of, well, this doesn't exist in our world, therefore other considerations, as you said, they're not supposed to like matter. Like, they matter. They're very important. Like, we need to also include them.
Emery, I love what you said about how it seems like in fantasy the default is white, because Peter's middle grade that he wrote, that's what actually I really loved about it, was because it was this, you know, high fantasy with all these, you know, magical things happening. And yet the characters were so clearly grounded in culture. And I just thought it makes the story that much richer. So
I agree so much. I love that book so much.
It's amazing.
I want to read it about how much I love this book. But like, it's so true. Like, I feel like what it does so much better than like, so many fantasies written by white people where they try to include people of color is that I feel like very often what you have is a white person painted brown. And I feel like you have the opposite in Peter's books where like it's not so much this emphasis on like, oh, like, of course, this is like, you know, a Latinx character. It's just so natural. You know, you see this character, you hear the way they think, and you see the things that they do and what matters to them. And it's so authentically like natural. I feel like that's like a really important thing, like, to see, especially like in kid lit and like in fantasy, because it's so rarely done that way. And it's so rarely seen as acceptable to challenge that kind of like that default that way. So I feel like that really like,
I really appreciate that, just because it was so difficult. Just like Adrianna, when I began the story like 5 years ago. So my characters were white, and I thought that there was no chance for a Latino kid to be the star of a big fantasy in another world. And so like I ended up, you know, through advice and help, I focus on food and little gestures. I know like my non-Latinx CPs didn't understand when my characters would point with their lips and stuff like that, but I knew that that Latinx kids would understand that, and you know, putting the broom behind the door, and I don't know, just and the food, which codes all of my characters. And I love that, and I love that you guys brought it up, because it makes me feel like, you know, it was difficult and it worked. So
I'm finding it interesting that a lot of you have been talking about how when you first started writing your books, it was like always some white kid. Because I feel like in my experience, not that it wasn't a white kid, but in my experience, it's easier to write horror if the main characters are white, because in my mind, I was just like, okay, there's no way that a Latina mom is going to like not demand that you are home by the time the sun sets. Like there's no like, oh, I'm going to a party where we may be playing with the Ouija board. No. We go to church here. Like to me, it was difficult. Like I had to get creative to write my characters in a horror element, because like not to say it, but I'm gonna have to say it. White people just get into all sorts of trouble. So it's like, you know, if I'm going to be writing a story where like, oh yeah, we like summoned some demonic power, I'm immediately thinking of a white kid. If any Latina, any black person, they already wearing a chain with like a cross. They're already like, oh, you're playing with an Ouija board. All right, I'm going home. So I'm gonna catch y'all tomorrow, assuming y'all alive. Like, I had to get really creative. Like to you guys are saying, you know, you just didn't imagine it. I could not imagine, because the situations of how these characters get in trouble would be wildly different. Like it had to be very, very different in order to get the plot pushing forward.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I just wrote a Latinx horror novel, and it's very true where like the one character only gets away with it because his whole family's dead, and the other one, the entire book is like, no. Like that was the only way I could make it work. Otherwise you'd be like.
See, but you find ways, you know, you like, and ways that connect to your culture. Like if I was to write something like that, I feel like the first thing I think about is Latinx parents who work from like sunrise to sunset, and then it makes a different, you know, the dynamic is so different and the circumstances change. And I feel like, you know, it's more than just us stepping into a genre that was like denied. We change it and we, you know, refigure what that genre means. And I feel like that even connects to the next question, which was talking about passing down our stories. And so my question is, due to language barriers and accessibility, it's often difficult for diaspora Latinx kids to engage with traditional stories and mythos from our cultures. But due to the barriers of American publishing, it's almost impossible to find these stories openly available in US markets. So as publishing attempts to open its doors to more Latinx authors, what impacts do you think these new books are having or will have on the ability of Latinx diaspora readers to reconnect with stories of our cultures? And how do you think our mythos might change as diaspora authors join the canon? And what changes would you like to see in these stories? Anyone?
Oh my god.
It's,
Okay,
it's
I'll go.
like it went off a block of text, so I'm like trying to think like what was the question
So
exactly?
it's like,
Oh,
you know, when you think of Greek mythology, I feel like now you might think of Percy Jackson, and Percy Jackson was added to the mythos of Greek mythology in the last decade. And so with every story that we put out, we're adding something to the mythos of Latin America. For example, if you write a story with a mythological creature that most kids in the United States might not know about, then you are introducing them to that magic and that mythology, and you might be adding to the canon. And so what kind of changes do you, not changes, but what kind of
Like, what kind of innovations, I guess, do you
yeah
feel being brought in, like, as we write our own stories and, like, as we contribute to these types of stories that will be associated with our ethnicity and, like, our country? You know, what kind of changes do you feel are being, like, brought in so far with, like, the changes that, with the changes that have been made in publishing and, like, the books that have been published, as well as, like, what kind of changes would you like to see going forward?
I think like what I immediately thought of was like I thought of like David Bowles and like how he writes a lot of like middle grade and young adult like Aztec sort of centered stories, especially like as a Mexican person that resonates with me. And what I would love to see long term is just like Aztec and like Nahuatl becoming not super synonymous with Mexico. Like I would love to see and I mean I get it. Like I get like Aztec is kind of like the main thing. It's like if anyone is going to learn anything in public school about ancient Mexico, it's probably gonna be the Aztecs. And like I'd be kind of hypocritical if I said like we shouldn't be writing Aztec stories. But like eventually I would love to see like books that involve stories and mythologies from like Oaxaca and like the Yucatan and like the northern parts of Mexico and the southwestern United States. And so I feel like he and like other people who are writing kind of mythology, I even think like Aiden Thomas and like Cemetery Boys bring like a huge variety of like Latinx sort of mythology and indigenous religion into his story also kind of broadens the spectrum of like what we're allowed to write. And so I think that's what I'm looking forward to. It's just being allowed to write things that aren't just necessarily the things that are immediately thought of with Latinx culture and indigeneity.
I think for like at least for my book, I've noticed you get the opportunity to expose kids to, and these are Latinx kids, to different parts of Latinx culture they might not be familiar with. I did a school visit down around San Antonio, and the students there were hilarious because they were insistent that I had the word for witch wrong in my book because I kept using Tule Vieja. And so I had to explain to them that I lived in Panama when I was a kid growing up, and that is like the La Llorona of Panama. And so I wasn't using the actual word for witch. This was a specific mythological character, and it was just something they weren't aware of. And so I really like the idea of showing Latinx kids that, just like you were saying, Jonny, there's all this stuff. There's not just one story. Like I super love the Rick Riordan imprints books and all the mythology that has brought in. At the same time, though, it's like we have the Cuban books or series, and then we have the Mexican American series, and we have like I would like to write for that, but like I love Carlos Hernandez and what he did with those, and it seems like, well, they already have a Cuban story, so I'm not even going to bother. And so I'd love for publishing to move past the idea that we already have one of those. We've checked the box on that, and so there you go, because there's so much variation and diversity and minutia that we could get into within our own cultures that I think kids deserve to be exposed to, so that they can learn about their heritage and their culture. And so I would like to see a ton more variety.
So in my case, my family doesn't do horror. So when it comes to me writing horror and like, you know, writing from my culture, like I know of these vague, horror figures like El Cuco or like, just general brujas. I know vaguely of them, but because my family doesn't do horror, it wasn't something that was like kind of passed down to me. So in my case, I kind of had to get creative with like, what is going to be the big bad in my horror stories? What is going to be, the antagonist that everyone's going to have to fight against? And one thing that's definitely helped was when I read, it was Daniel Jose Older's Shadow Shaper series, because it was about this like Afro Puerto Rican girl who she just, she's like the chosen, she's not exactly the chosen one, but she has some like deeply embedded power that's been passed down through her family. And she like finds out, and I'm not going to spoil the whole thing, so don't worry. But like, she finds out that there's like this like weird shadow organization-ish, people that are coming after her. And she has to kind of like immediately figure out like, okay, I got to like really wield this power, but no one in my family wants to talk about it. So I felt her on that because my family doesn't talk to me about, a lot of our cultural things. But the way he kind of, like he wasn't drawing exactly from the culture. He was also kind of like making things up as he went. As a writer, I mean, I'm not saying like he just, just threw words at a wall, saw what stuck. But it just, for me, it definitely helped to see that, oh, okay, I don't have to like immediately be like, okay, what from my culture can I like talk about? I can just make things up and then throw a Latina face on it. That's it. Like no one's going to shoot me for that. I can just do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love that you mentioned that too, because I feel like for me, because I'm multiracial and multicultural and like very multicultural, like I actively participate in like 6 different cultures from my heritage. So I think it's really interesting. Something I finally allowed myself to do recently, and only because I've been seeing authors like DJ Older and others who do kind of like play around with that, is just letting myself kind of draw influence from like anything that I know of, like anything that I know, like both, just like my heritage, but also just like being an American, just like the stories that, you grew up with here, just pulling all of that together and then slapping, a Black character in there, slapping a Latinx character in there, and just realizing that like, it doesn't necessarily have to be, a Puerto Rican story for me to write a Puerto Rican character in that space. I can write a Japanese story and throw a Puerto Rican character in there, they're both my heritage, and I have the right to like explore that however I want to. And like the contributions that makes to like a Puerto Rican reader, like I hope it's cool for them. Like I hope that's something that's like nice to see themselves like somewhere else.
I agree. And I think that with Peter, when, we're discussing like mythology, I feel like from the diaspora standpoint, I can't really talk about that because I'm not diaspora myself. But as a native Puerto Rican, or not native, but like, yes, I live here. I've been here all my life. But I don't know if you're aware of this, but like we don't have a very vivid or rich understanding of our own mythologies or our religion, our traditions, prior to what is, kindly stated or named colonialism. So we have a lot of untapped sources and a lot of like blanks and question marks throughout history. And I feel like it's double that for anyone who's diaspora, because they are immersed in 2 different cultures. And in my case, personally, I feel like I am Puerto Rican, but I can't escape the United States and the influence that we have both in language and culture. Of course, language is part of culture, but for example, English is my second language, and I feel like I can speak it and think in English more so than in Spanish, even though like as soon as I turn this computer off, I'm going to be speaking in Spanish exclusively. So I feel like I want more stories that explore what it is like to have a history that's so vivid and so realistic to the person. Sorry, the fly is bothering me again. So you have like gods and you have these demonic forces and you have these heroes and these villains, but we know them barely or at all. Like we don't know them at all. I am a professor, and sometimes when I'm like in the classroom teaching and talking about certain things, my students, doesn't matter the age group, they don't really know what I'm talking about. And I'm not like the main source of anything, but I do feel like I have a curiosity that is not reinforced. It's not promoted or not like encouraged. And I feel like that's something that I would personally love to see. Like, what is our history and what does our culture look like? What does it mean to people who are not just here all the time? Because we matter, but other people who also identify within our culture, they matter as well. So it's this exclusionary thing of, well, we're all the same, but not really. Like, there are like layers or levels or whatever you want to call them. I think that makes sense, I guess, but does it? I don't know. Like, the richer we can make the canon, the better. And I thoroughly disagree. He's one of my personal heroes, writing heroes, Jason Reynolds. I know that he would never read my book because it has a dragon or several dragons. But I personally feel like contemporary stories have so much worth and we need them. But I think that there's something beautiful and valid and worthy about exploring our identities through things that we would normally not see. Or we wouldn't see ourselves in those stories regularly. So I feel like that's something that I would also like to see. Like, what is it about culture and myth that we can reinterpret or remix, depending on where we stand within that spectrum of identity, culturally speaking?
Yeah, I think that's actually like a really interesting topic, I guess, to bring up too. Is just the way that we reimagine things, just like the differences in our experiences, and how, especially when it comes to like, being from a culture where so much has been lost historically, the way that the things that we bring, we're kind of just building up a new history, because in 400 years, like, we are history, what we're laying down right now is, hopefully people will remember us. Hopefully we're those kind of writers, but what we're laying down now is part of that history and that culture that, people of our own cultures will look back on 400 years from now and be like, oh yes, that myth that, Amparo Ortiz came up with, 400 years ago. Like, I feel like that's something that, like, I know, like, to a certain extent, like, we don't think about that, and we don't want to, because we don't want to be like, oh, I hope my book lasts 400 years, because we know that may very well not happen. But to a certain extent, just the stories, the way that we reinvent stories and the influences that we have on what gets written after us, I think really impacts the way that stories will be seen, down the line. And that's kind of a cool power that we have. So the next thing I actually want to talk about is influences. And it does kind of play off of what we were just talking about. But I want to ask you if there are any Latinx authors or creators that have really inspired your work. And thinking into the future, knowing that you are now part of the Latinx canon, what would you want future writers to take as inspiration from your own stories? What would you hope that your stories would teach them?
I'll go.
Somebody go.
I think, well, like we kind of have been saying, where so many of us wrote white characters to begin with. So that's what I did. And then I started diving into Margarita Engel and Pablo Cartaya and Carlos Hernandez. And then I read Nina Moreno's book, and I'm like in love with it. And it hit me like, oh, we're allowed to do this. I can do this. And so I really, like, I owe everything to those authors, because I don't know that I would have thought that that was even in the realm of possibility, that my stories mattered, that I could tell them. And so I think especially Margarita Engels, because she is of the same generation as my dad and kind of has the same immigration story that he does. And so I connected with that very strongly. And so I would hope, though, like, with now me being, and it's so weird to claim that, to say, like, with now me being part of that group of Cuban American authors, like, I'm still a little reluctant to say that somebody might actually pull a story about a kid that can talk to animals off the shelf and go, hey, I can do that too. But I think, and this kind of connects to our previous question, I hope that my stories will show, up and coming Cuban American authors, that they don't just have to write about their pain, that they can, these kids can be the heroes of the story, and that their identity, while it's important and it informs the character, it doesn't have to be the only thing. Like, Nestor is an artist and a military kid, and he's sarcastic, and we are so many more things. And so I hope that young writers will see that pretty much just write whatever the hell you want in who you are and go for it. And I hope that enough of us will have broken down doors in publishing to make that possible for them.
Obviously my the person I look up to is DJ Older, and if you're watching this, you should follow me on Twitter because I'm following you. Anyways, sorry. Obviously I look up to him, but what I want to do through a lot of my horror books, not just like, scare people because it's horror, but I remember a while ago, it was on Twitter, someone was just like, what is one trope that ends up in your books no matter what? And I thought about that in bookstores, whatever. And I thought about that, and I was just like, pretty much my main characters have always been, Afro-Latina who get straight A's. Like, that's it. They are just, great in school. That's it. And so, like, to me, on the one hand, it makes sense to me because I'm just kind of like, listen, you have your hands full with the supernatural stuff. You might as well just be a genius in the classroom. Like, I'll give it, because that's added stress. I'm not going to give that to you as my character. You're like my child. But anyways, I do that. At first, it just kind of happened offhand. But after a while, I realized I want to do that because I want to tell my readers, who I assume will be Afro-Latinas, whatever, I want to tell them that they are smarter than they think. And a lot of my characters often, say really poignant things. And it's because, I'm in my 20s. So sometimes I say smart things and I just like put it in the mouths of these teenagers. But no, like, these kids are definitely much smarter than they think. And I want them to know that. I want them to see that in themselves, even as they get into really stupid horror situations that, to be quite honest, they had no business getting into, except for my stories, because that's what I write. So that's one thing that I've always, I want my readers to get, just, like, you're way smarter than you give yourself credit for.
Agreed. And also, really stupid horror stories or horror situations is actually the title of my love life. Very good. I'm very good, Vincent. So I feel like, to actually answer the question, yes, I love Nina Moreno, DJ Older, Soraya Cordova, and personally Mia Garcia. She's a friend of mine now, but to think that I'm her peer and her colleague, I mean, we're both from the same country, but like, she left, I stayed, but like, we're connected just because we have these experiences. They're not the same, but they're similar. And they showed me, like, all of those authors showed me that I could also belong on shelves, but at the same time, I still struggle with that whole belonging thing, because, not to downplay anything, but I'm just like, I'm in shock that now people can pick up my book and anything written by all of my heroes is also right next to it, or in the shelf behind it, or in front of it, or whatever it is. So it's freaking me out, but I do want people to have a great understanding of who they are. And if they don't, they can find their truths in their own time. I think that's my personal message in terms of everything I write. It's like, you might think you are something today or someone today, and tomorrow that definition or that identity or something is going to change, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we can redefine ourselves and no one can say that we're wrong about it, or that we're doing it the wrong way, or that we're not valid, or whatever it is. I feel like a trope that I include is found family. And I feel like if you don't belong anywhere right now, that doesn't mean that you're never going to belong. And that's something that, as creatives as well, we need to remember, because maybe it's not happening for us right now. No one is buying our books, or no editor believes in our stories. No agent wants to represent us, but that's right now. Maybe tomorrow that could change. And honestly, that will change. Like, I'm very optimistic. I feel like, okay, things aren't working out right now, so what? Like, there's still tomorrow, there's next week, next year, whenever it is. I don't like parameters in terms of, oh, if you don't make it by this age, you failed. That's not true. especially for people who have everything working against them structurally in terms of, again, the topic of privilege. Like, we don't really have a lot of standing in a lot of places. So just because you're not making it now doesn't mean that you're never going to make it. And even if you don't make it, you're still a worthy person. You deserve respect, love, attention, friendship, whatever it is that you want. So
You have me like teary-eyed. I'm like,
oh
my God.
I did it.
Yeah. I'm sad.
Purpose
really
accomplished. Thank you.
So I mean, I think as far as influences go, like obviously, Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe was like a really big thing for me. Just like as a Mexican person, seeing like brown Mexican people on a page for the very first time, really, and seeing that it was just like something that even, I mean, I wasn't even really writing at that point, but just seeing that there was something that could be in a book was hugely transformational for me. I mean, even though it's basically like historical fiction at this point, but like still, it was great. And like I think like Gabby Rivera and Juliet Takes a Breath like is probably my favorite contemporary book of all time. And just like the way that like I feel that story is structured kind of differently than a normal book really like solidified the way I write books, because like I just kind of jumped into writing one day because I thought it might be cool and I had no idea how to write a book, and so I just kind of tried and saw what happened. And so that was like, wow, cool. Like not everyone writes the way that like every single other book is written. So I love that. Jose Olivares and like his, especially Citizen Illegal, like I think was really formative for like, especially now, like I read it recently. And so just like where I'm taking my writing and like things that like I want to bring up in my writing. And even like in non-literary media, like I really look up to Tanya Saracho, who's the creator and showrunner for Vida. And like Marvin Brian Lemus and Linda Yvette Chavez, who created Gentified, which is like my favorite show this year. Like, I think telling those stories as well that are like super Latino and just like unapologetically so on television, like says a lot for just what we can do now. And I think personally, I write stories where it's just like, one, they're very intersectional. Like I write Latinx stories or Chicanic stories, but I also write very queer stories. And I think that just speaks to the kind of person I was growing up. I really just wanted to be very assimilated, very like white acting, very closeted. Like I grew up in a way that like I wanted to make everyone around me as comfortable as possible. And so my writing very much speaks to like be the chaotic queer that I know you are inside and own it. Like I think of Catcher in the Rye and just like how fucking chaotic Holden, whatever his name was. And it's like brown Latinx people deserve to be just as fucking big of a mess as Holden was. Like, and I'm gonna go write those. Like if they end up in a hotel with a hooker, like so be it. Like he did. Yeah.
You need to stop saying things that make me have like the wildest expressions, because I'm gonna like just, you need to stop saying those things.
No, but I'm so glad to be on a panel with all Latinx people, because I have realized none of us have an inside face. I have no inside face, just like we have no inside voice. And so it makes me happy because I always get called out when I'm on virtual panels because I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, so kudos to the lack of inside face
and
that
it's
we
live,
all
so
have.
like, we're just seeing it as it happens.
Yeah. Exactly. I was already a little bit worried because I was like, we're going to do this live, and I know that I can't control my faces because usually I have to go back and edit out all the really bad ones. So I'm just like, like, oh well, guess that's we're just going to have to deal with it. It's fine. Peter, you got the next question?
Okay. So for the next question, I wanted to ask, if you could have one big publishing dream come true, what would it be? And don't be, we're manifesting. We are, we can have big dreams, So I want to hear what those are and be as specific as you want.
So when you say publishing dreams, what do you...
Anything related to your story.
Okay, so...
I want a movie, I want everything. So tell me what you want.
All right, so first I want
Yeah, list.
First, this is
Listen,
a list.
I deserve it.
Love
I've worked hard this
Yes,
year.
ma'am.
2020 has taken
Yes,
a lot
you
from
do.
me.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Correct.
first, I would say that I desperately would like my any one of, because I have so many like ideas for horror books, so like any one of them really. I want it to be adapted to a film by Jordan Peele or Nia DaCosta. I'm pretty sure Candyman will be fantastic. So that's just the first thing. Second, I want to write for America Chavez because I'm obsessed with that Marvel character, and like who doesn't love a bulletproof Latina from like the Bronx? I like, why not? I should write for her. And then, pending that, I would like to play her in a movie. I know that's not publishing wise, but I feel like I look like her. So just slap a wig on me. We're good. That's it. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's nice. I like that list. Mine is similar, I guess, but also like this is going to be extremely nerdy, and I don't apologize. I speak 2.5 languages. I like saying that I speak 2.5 languages. So I would really like to see my books translated into those languages. So I feel like I write in English primarily. I don't know if you know how the Latin American market works, but it's quite difficult to get published in Spanish. And even if you handed me a contract tomorrow, I would not write in Spanish because I'm so empty and dead when I'm writing in Spanish. I feel like all the heart leaves, and that's nothing against my own culture. It's just that Spanish is harder. So yeah. But I would love someone to do all that hard work for me and translate it into Spanish. And also I would love to see it in Korean. Yeah. And also, if anyone is watching from any streaming service, I would love an adaptation, a television show, several seasons. I can write them all of the episodes. Yes. You're welcome, America.
Okay. Oh, you go, Adrianna.
No, you can. It's fine.
So I think like my main one, like I would definitely love an American Dirt size advance. Like I think that'd be really cute.
Cute.
And aside from that, like I would just love to see 1500 Miles from the Sun like as a limited series. Going back to Tanya Saracho, like I'm manifesting her, daily manifesting her, like stumbling on my book one day and just being like, oh my God, this is great. Let me go do this real quick. Yeah, those two things.
I think for mine too, I really want to see my books translated into Spanish because so I taught for 16 years before I became an author, and ESL was my main subject that I taught. And I always think about those students that I had, and I would love for them to read my books in Spanish as well. But then in my last one, I'm going to pull Amparo along with me on this one. So I always see authors that get to go be visiting like authors in Singapore or just in other countries. And so my ideal situation would be that Amparo and I get to be visiting authors in Korea, and we just spend a whole bunch of time there together.
I would every day.
Yeah.
Just for no reason. I would just cry.
Exactly.
Yes.
We'll just sob together as we walk down the street. That sounds like a plan.
Tears. Yes, exactly. I like that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So I'm just going to squeeze this one in. So for the last question, I want to talk about whisper networks and the way that you were able to form your own whisper network connections. So for anybody who's watching this and doesn't know, publishing can often be very hard to navigate if you don't have your own little whisper network, or basically secret community who will convey info to you that's not necessarily public. So if you can give some advice to up-and-coming Latinx writers on how they can form those connections, and any advice on essentially what to do and like what to think about as they try to form their own connections.
In my case, personally, I started as a blogger, like I don't remember the exact year, but it was a long time ago. Let's not count. But yeah, it was a while ago. And so today I have a lot of friends who I had back then, and we were all unpublished. We were dreaming of a contract and such. So I feel like that specifically would be something that's great. You have your people in terms of, I don't want to say like experience, but where are you versus where would you like to be? Because sometimes people who are in the industry and have what you want, they don't really care about you that much. I mean, I don't want to like be that mean. I'm not mean, but like I don't want to be like that. But I feel like a lot of authors, they mean well and they do care about up and coming writers and they do support up and coming writers and debuts. But I feel like if you can just find your own community within what you currently have, that's actually helpful because you know that no one is sweet talking you, no one is trying to get anything from you. And if you can find those connections, it's hard. I mean, blogs are currently considered dead or not as used. So I feel like social media in terms of Twitter, specifically Twitter, you would have a community there that's a little bit more active, and maybe those people, people who are tweeting, or for example, people who enter pitch contests, or people who are actively seeking representation. Like, you can't trust everyone, but if people are willing to give exactly what they get, or there's like a balance, it's not you're always the one talking to these people and they give you crumbs, or they like respond one time and that's it. Read the room, right? So maybe just, find people that want what you want, but that want it in a safe, respectful, and trustworthy environment, or an approach that is healthy for everyone. Because I feel like just because we're all in this together, we're not all in this together, unfortunately. I feel like a lot of people take for granted the fact that, like the other day, I don't want to like drag Twitter drama into this, but like the other day people were talking about, or not Twitter drama, but just something that was discussed, the unfollowing thing. Like when you have an agent or when you get a book deal, like people just unfollow people who are unpublished. And I understand that you curate your space however you wish to curate it, but why do you choose to leave people in the dust in the sense that, oh, you don't serve me anymore? Whisper networks to me have all been based on friendship first, outside of writing. But I've met them through writing. So it's tricky, but it's possible. Don't tell everything to everyone, but just, I don't even know what I'm saying. I think I know what I'm saying, but I don't know what I'm going to say next. I just, whisper networks are hard because I feel like maybe I know someone who knows all the dirt, but they can't tell me or they won't tell me because they don't know me that well and I don't know them that well. And sometimes I feel like even though they mean well, people who do have this information, they can't just tell everybody for a variety of reasons, right? But like, what is our responsibility if we know someone is toxic, or if we know someone is racist, or we know someone is harming others? Why would we not take it upon ourselves to help as many people as we can? I mean, I understand burning bridges is a thing, and implicating ourselves in things that are dangerous or makes us liable in a way is a thing. I don't know. It's a very tricky thing to navigate because trusting everyone is out of the question, but also you need to be open to trust, because if you don't, there's nothing wrong with being alone, but in this industry, it's not good. It's not a good thing to be alone or to feel alone.
I'm still sort of like curating my Whisper networks. I don't know. I don't really use Twitter. Like, I have my author Twitter, and then I have my private Twitter where there's nothing but memes and tomfoolery. But like I don't really, either way, like I don't really use it much. I do have like some like author friends that I like do trust, and there are other people who I'm just kind of like, it would be a dream come true if you would follow me back, but I'm also not going to harass you for it because that's just insanity. So Whisper networks tend to be something that like Amparo said is definitely very hard because, and this is something that like I've heard kind of like over and over again through the grapevine with respect to the unfollowing of like, oh, you're unpublished. currently I'm unpublished. I'm following a bunch of also unpublished people, but I'm also not close to people like in general. So for me, it doesn't make much of a difference. For me, it's more like, okay, like these people are nice. I'm gonna stick by them. And then sometimes you hear like through the grapevine, like, oh, that person is a mess. Like, don't talk to them, or like I wouldn't try to reach out to them or whatever. And a lot of the times, you're gonna have to make your own decision on that. Like, you're an adult. But what I find is helpful is, one, look at the context. So let's say like an author is, just a dark-skinned Black woman. Usually when they say, oh, she's hard to deal with or she's hard to work with, it's usually racially coded. Like, I find that. And so for me, it's just like, unless you tell me any more information, that is garbage, gossip to me. It doesn't make any sense. So a lot of the times it's just, the context of it is helpful, or you have to think about like, okay, how long have I known you, person who is giving me this information? And do I know if you have your own personal biases? And, you make your decision based off that. But yeah, whispered networks are very, very difficult. And I'm still curating mine, and I'm still unpublished for now. And we'll see how that works out in my future.
I think for my suggestion on that, just the first, I guess you could call it a whisper network, would have been my local SCBWI chapter, which I got a lot of great information from because I went in knowing absolutely nothing. But even for a group of authors in the middle of Texas, it was a super white and group. And so while I got information from them, I really wanted a bit more support for people who would understand my stories better. So I joined a friend of mine, Natalia Goldberg, started a Kidlit Latinx group on Facebook. And what I like about that is there are people of all, I guess you could say, publishing levels on there. There's aspiring writers, there's published authors. And so you're always free to ask questions. And they can be anonymous if it needs to be. And so there's a lot of open information. And I really appreciate that, because I feel like I got support from that, where you don't go in feeling like you have to explain yourself at the start, because there's an understanding there from a shared experience. And I think I think my experience in publishing is a little bit different in the sense that my agent is Mexican American, and then my editor is from the Philippines, and then even my publicist is from Peru. So I'm enjoying my experience, I think. More than I thought I would. And I think that's why, like, in terms of whisper networks and how cautious I feel like Latinx authors need to be, because you don't know if you're going to get hurt in a particular situation. I think that's why I want to advocate so much for more diversity in all levels of publishing, because then it creates a safer space for Latinx authors, and then those whisper networks maybe aren't quite as essential, one would hope, but yeah.
So, well, first, to answer Nina's question, yes, my book is a gay Gemini Pride Month book, and I love that about it. Geminis are the most down-ass air signs, so I support. But with with publishing, like I feel like my entire journey thus far has kind of just been like Kool-Aid manning through walls while also blindfolded, and just like trying to see what happens, because like I really haven't even been writing for 2 years yet. So like it's all happened very quickly, like too quickly to be able to really learn anything or digest anything or even like be able to really speak on it, I think, with any kind of like intelligent verbiage. But I think what has helped me a lot has been Twitter as a resource. Like, I mean, if you're a Latinx queer writer, like I would definitely look into like QPOC Chat hosted by Sonny Reyes. Or like if you're not queer, but like if you're a writer in Latinx, like maybe look into like Some More Words hosted by Charlie Knight, and just kind of like jump right into those. Like engage in them, converse in them when you feel like someone else is like taking part in that and you're like, oh, that answer is really cool. Like I wish I could be their friend. Like go and just like comment like, hi, heart emoji. I don't know. Something like not creepy, but also something kind of inviting. And because I met like a lot of people that I know and I look to for information and I have surrounded that are much smarter than me, mostly because of these like Twitter environments where you can kind of talk about your writing in a very non-judgmental way and interact with people who are just wanting the same thing and like coming up in the exact same way that you are, or even like more have a longer history in it. And like there's published authors, there are people who are just writing their books, people who are even just thinking about writing a book are all taking part in this together. And so it's a really cool community just to be a part of. And I promise like most of us are friendly. So like, you know, I would give that a shot. That's probably like my take on Whisper Networks. Go try Twitter.
Okay, but bouncing off of that, I met Jonny via DB Pit. And I remember I was like literally sitting there waiting the entire time, like Jonny better get an agent. And then we like got agents around the same time. And then like we sold pretty close. I was like, yes. So now like, and now we're debuting a month apart. Like, yes.
Yeah,
like, that is so beautiful to hear.
I met Tony through like DB Pit too. Like most of my close friends have been through like either DB Pit or some other hashtag something or another on Twitter. Yeah.
Some other hashtag.
Okay, great. That was a great discussion, and I want to thank you all for being here. And now that we are at, you know, the final moments of this chat, would you guys like to go ahead and promote yourselves a little bit?
Should we just? Oh, okay. So you can find me on Twitter at Jonny Escribe, Jonny, like my first name, and then Escribe. You can go and pre-order my debut book, 1,500 Miles from the Sun, on Amazon Book Depository, or you can go and call up your local bookstore because they may or may not. Just go to the website; they may have it there. Like, go check that. And yeah.
I'm on Twitter at Cuevas Writes, and I guess you can go order The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez because it's out now. If you go to bookpeople.org, that's my local bookstore in Austin. They have signed copies if you want one. And then next year in 2021, please pre-order Cuba in My Pocket because it's the story about my dad's immigration to the U.S. and I'm super excited to tell it.
That's awesome. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Amparo_Ortiz. And Blaze Wrath Games is already available. It's out in 2.5 weeks. I don't want to talk about it. But yeah, you can pre-order signed copies from my local indie here in Puerto Rico. It's called The Bookmark. And actually, I think it's the pinned tweet. So if you look up my Twitter, you will see it there, the link there. And yeah, I love everyone on this panel, like genuinely. That's all I wanted to say.
You can follow me on Twitter at V_E_Tirado. You'll see my book news there when it comes. You'll see how unhinged I am. It's fine.
You can find me on Twitter at Peter X Lopez, and I don't have anything out because I don't have an agent yet. But in lieu of that, go order the other books that everyone has and pre-order Meet Cute Diary, which Emery's coming out with next year.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Emery Lee Who. You can also find me on Instagram at Emery Lee Who is my Artstagram, and at Emery Lee Books is my Authorstagram. And you can pre-order Meet Cute Diary, my trans rom-com, light on the trauma, heavy on the bad puns and corny meet cutes. So please go pre-order that. And you can also add it on Goodreads. So yeah, thank you all for coming. And I hope you will subscribe to my channel. You'll get info on our next roundtable, which I don't know when that will be yet, but it is coming. So
bye.
Yay! Bye, everyone.